The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan village as Marine Corporal Jake Morrison adjusted his helmet and checked his rifle one last time. He had been deployed for 8 months now, and every day felt like walking through a minefield of uncertainty. The intelligence report suggested this particular village harbored insurgent activity, but Jake had learned to trust his instincts more than paperwork. His squad of 12 Marines moved quietly through the dusty streets, their boots making soft crunching sounds on the gravel. The village seemed eerily quiet for mid-morning. Usually children would be playing in the streets, women hanging laundry, and men gathered around small shops drinking tea. Today the windows were shuttered, and an unsettling silence hung in the air like morning fog. Jake's radio crackled softly. "Charlie Team, this is base. Intel suggests possible IED activity in your sector. Proceed with extreme caution." The voice of Lieutenant Colonel Harris was steady, but carried an undertone of concern that Jake had learned to recognize after months of missions. "Copy that. Base. Charlie Team proceeding as planned," Jake responded, his voice barely above a whisper. He signaled to his team to spread out and maintain tactical spacing. They had done this dance countless times before, but something about today felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. As they approached the village center, Jake noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt. They were recent, maybe from the night before. His training kicked in immediately. Fresh tracks meant movement, and movement in a supposedly abandoned area meant potential trouble. He held up his fist, the universal signal for his team to stop and assess. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, his second-in-command, moved up beside him. She had been his partner through thick and thin, someone he trusted with his life. "Those tracks don't look right," she whispered, pointing to the peculiar pattern in the dirt. "Too deep for a normal vehicle. Could be carrying something heavy." Jake nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. Heavy cargo in a conflict zone usually meant one of two things: weapons or explosives. Neither option was particularly comforting. He made a quick decision to alter their route, leading the team around the village center rather than through it. The new path took them along a narrow alley between 2-story mud brick buildings. The walls were high enough to provide cover, but also created a natural funnel that made Jake's skin crawl. Every window, every doorway, every shadow could hide danger. His fellow Marines moved like ghosts, their training evident in every step. Private Tommy Chen, the youngest member of their squad at barely 19, was positioned near the rear. Jake could see the kid's nervousness in the way he held his weapon and constantly scanned the rooftops. Tommy had only been in country for 6 weeks, and the reality of war was still sinking in. Jake made a mental note to keep a closer eye on him. As they navigated the alley, Jake's radio buzzed again. This time it was Corporal Davis from Alpha Team, operating in a sector 2 kilometers away. "Charlie Team, we've got movement in the hills overlooking your position. Looks like possible spotters. Watch your 6. The information sent a chill down Jake's spine. Spotters meant someone was watching them, tracking their movements, potentially setting up an ambush. He immediately ordered his team to pick up the pace while maintaining their stealth approach. They reached a small courtyard where 3 alleys converged. Jake paused, studying the area carefully. Something was wrong. The ground looked disturbed, not in the natural way that foot traffic would create, but in a deliberate pattern. His demolitions training from Quantico suddenly became very relevant. "Rodriguez, take a look at this," he called softly, pointing to the suspicious ground patterns. She approached carefully, her experienced eyes immediately recognizing what Jake had spotted. "Pressure plate," she confirmed quietly. "Definitely recent work. Professional setup." Her assessment was grim but not surprising. The insurgents in this region had become increasingly sophisticated in their tactics. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. They were in a trap, surrounded by buildings on 3 sides with only one way out. The smart move would be to retreat immediately, but their mission parameters required them to investigate reports of weapons caches in this exact area. He made the difficult decision to call for backup. "Base, this is Charlie Team. We've identified IED placement in our operational area, requesting immediate EOD support and possible air cover." The response was immediate, but not what he wanted to hear. "Charlie Team, EOD is engaged in another sector. Estimated arrival time 45 minutes. Air support available but limited due to civilian presence. You are cleared to withdraw if situation becomes untenable." 45 minutes felt like an eternity in their current position. Jake weighed their options carefully. They could retreat and wait for EOD, potentially allowing insurgents to relocate whatever they were protecting. Or they could find an alternative route to complete their mission. His decision was made when Private Chen spotted movement in one of the upper story windows. "Contact second floor, building to our east," Chen reported, his voice steady despite his youth. Jake immediately shifted into combat mode. The presence of armed individuals confirmed that this was more than just a simple patrol through an empty village. They were dealing with an active enemy presence, and retreat was no longer a simple option. "Rodriguez, take Chen and Williams around the left flank. Peterson and I will provide cover in advance from the center. Stay low, stay alert, and nobody plays hero today." His orders were clear and direct, the product of months of experience in similar situations. As his team began to move into position, Jake felt the familiar mixture of fear and determination that came with combat situations. Every Marine was trained for this moment, but no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the reality of life and death. Decisions made in split seconds. The morning that had started as a routine patrol was rapidly evolving into something much more dangerous. Jake checked his ammunition count, adjusted his position for better cover, and prepared for whatever was about to unfold. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors, but they were still too far away to provide immediate assistance. The village that had seemed empty and harmless just an hour earlier now felt like a maze of death, with every corner potentially hiding an enemy fighter. Jake's radio crackled with updates from other teams in the area, painting a picture of coordinated insurgent activity across multiple sectors. As he prepared to give the signal for his team to advance, Jake Morrison had no idea that this mission would change his life forever. The first shot came from the rooftop across the courtyard, the crack of the rifle echoing off the mud brick walls like thunder. Jake felt the bullet whiz past his ear, so close he could feel the displacement of air. Training kicked in immediately as he dove behind a low stone wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Contact front. Sniper on the roof?" Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos as she returned fire, her M4 carbine chattering in controlled bursts. The team scattered to available cover, each Marine finding protection behind walls, doorways, and abandoned market stalls. Jake's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The sniper had the high ground and clear sight lines across most of the courtyard. Moving forward would be suicide, but staying pinned down would allow more insurgents to surround them. He needed to change the dynamic quickly. "Chen, can you get eyes on that roof?" Jake called out, keeping his head low as another bullet chipped concrete near his position. "Negative, Corporal. Too much cover up there," Chen responded from behind an overturned cart about 20 meters away. The kid was handling his first real firefight better than Jake had expected. Peterson, their communications specialist, was trying to reach base when a second shooter opened fire from a different building. The crossfire forced the entire team to press themselves against whatever cover they could find. Jake realized they were dealing with a coordinated ambush, not a chance encounter. "Base, this is Charlie Team. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions. Request immediate air support!" Peterson's voice was strained but professional as bullets kicked up dust around his position. The radio crackled with static before Lieutenant Colonel Harris's voice came through. "Charlie Team, air support is spinning up now. Estimated time on station 12 minutes. Can you hold your position?" 12 minutes might as well have been 12 hours in their current situation. Jake knew they needed to act fast or risk being completely surrounded. He spotted a drainage ditch that ran along the eastern side of the courtyard, potentially offering concealed movement toward one of the sniper positions. "Rodriguez, that ditch at 2 o'clock. Think you can make it?" Jake pointed toward the depression in the ground, barely visible from their current position. She studied the route quickly, calculating angles and cover. "It's risky but doable. Give me covering fire on my signal." Jake coordinated with the rest of the team, preparing to lay down suppressive fire while Rodriguez made her move. The plan was simple but dangerous. If she could reach the building where one sniper was positioned, she might be able to neutralize the threat and give them options for escape. "On 3, Jake announced. 1, 2, 3. The Marines opened fire in unison, their combined firepower forcing the snipers to take cover. Rodriguez sprinted across the open ground in a low crouch, her boots barely making sound on the hard-packed earth. She made it to the ditch just as the enemy fire resumed, bullets tracking her path seconds too late. From her new position, Rodriguez had a better angle on the first building. She spotted movement in a second-floor window and took careful aim. Her shot was precise, and the sniper's rifle clattered to the courtyard below, followed by an ominous silence from that position. First target down, she reported, already scanning for the second shooter. The elimination of one sniper gave the team breathing room, but Jake knew their situation was still precarious. Intelligence reports had mentioned weapons caches in this area, which meant more insurgents could arrive at any moment. They needed to either complete their mission quickly or extract before reinforcements showed up. "Peterson, what's our status on that air support?" Jake asked while keeping watch on the surrounding buildings. 8 minutes out, Corporal. Cobra gunships inbound. Peterson's update was welcome news, but 8 minutes was still a lifetime in combat. As if reading Jake's thoughts, the distinctive sound of diesel engines echoed from the village's main road. Vehicles were approaching, and they weren't friendly. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized the ambush was about to become a much larger engagement. "We've got company coming," Williams announced from his position near the courtyard entrance. "Sounds like multiple vehicles approaching fast." Jake made a tactical decision that would haunt him later. Instead of falling back immediately, he decided to push forward toward the suspected weapons cache. If they could gather intelligence on insurgent capabilities before extracting, the mission might still be salvageable. "Chen, Williams, you're with me. We're going to check that building on the north side. Rodriguez, hold this position and watch our backs. Peterson, keep trying to get us some fast air." The 3 Marines moved quickly across the courtyard, using the cover Rodriguez had cleared with her accurate shooting. The building Jake had identified looked different from the others. Newer construction, reinforced doors, and windows that had been recently boarded up. As they approached the structure, Jake noticed fresh footprints in the dirt leading to a side entrance. The prints were from military-style boots, not the sandals typically worn by local civilians. This confirmed his suspicions that they had stumbled onto something significant. The side door was unlocked, which immediately raised Jake's alertness level. Unlocked doors in combat zones usually meant traps. He signaled for Chen and Williams to stack up behind him as he prepared to enter the building. Inside, the structure was dark and cool, with narrow shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the boarded windows. The smell hit them immediately: gun oil, explosive compounds, and something else Jake couldn't identify. His demolitions training helped him recognize the chemical odors associated with bomb-making materials. "We've got a bomb factory," Jake whispered into his radio, knowing Rodriguez and Peterson needed to be aware of what they were dealing with. The main room contained workbenches covered with wires, circuit boards, and metal containers that Jake recognized as improvised explosive device components. This wasn't just a weapons cache. It was a manufacturing facility for the roadside bombs that had been plaguing coalition forces throughout the region. Williams moved to a back room and immediately called out, "Corporal, you need to see this." Jake joined him and found rows of completed IEDs, carefully arranged on wooden shelves like deadly merchandise. The sophistication of the devices was impressive and terrifying. These weren't crude pipe bombs, they were professional-grade explosives designed to penetrate armored vehicles. "How many?" Jake asked, though he was already counting in his head. "Looks like at least 30 completed devices, plus enough materials to make probably 50 more," Williams replied, his voice tight with the implications. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder, and Jake knew they were running out of time. This discovery was huge. Taking out this facility would save countless coalition lives, but they needed to survive long enough to report their findings. "Peterson, get on the horn to base. Tell them we've found a major IED manufacturing facility. Grid coordinates." Jake rattled off their precise location while mentally calculating their options. The situation had evolved from a simple patrol to a significant intelligence discovery, but they were still trapped in hostile territory, with enemy reinforcements approaching. Jake looked at the shelves of explosives and made a decision that would change everything. "We're going to destroy this place," he announced to his team. "Chen, start setting charges. Williams, help him. We've got maybe 5 minutes before those vehicles arrive." Jake's hands moved quickly as he assembled the demolition charges, his training taking over despite the chaos around them. The sound of vehicles was getting closer, and he could hear Rodriguez engaging targets from her position in the courtyard. Time was running out faster than water through a broken dam. "Chen, Grab those detonation cords and run them to the back wall, Jake ordered while carefully placing C4 explosives near the largest cache of completed IEDs. The irony wasn't lost on him. Using bombs to destroy bombs, but it was the most effective way to ensure this facility could never be used again. Williams was monitoring the radio chatter when Peterson's voice crackled through with urgent news. Charlie team, we've got 3 technicals approaching from the East Road. Heavy machine guns mounted. Air support still 4 minutes out. Technical vehicles, pickup trucks with mounted heavy weapons, were bad news in their current position. The building they were in provided protection from small arms fire, but the heavy machine guns could tear through the mud brick walls like paper. How long do you need for those charges? Williams asked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool interior of the building. Jake checked his work quickly. 2 more minutes to set the timers and run the det cord. We need to be at least 200 meters away when this goes off, or we'll be part of the explosion. The sound of screeching brakes and shouting voices in Arabic confirmed that the enemy reinforcements had arrived. Through gaps in the boarded windows, Jake could see armed fighters jumping from the vehicles and taking positions around the courtyard. They were completely surrounded now. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, tension evident despite her professional tone. Multiple hostiles moving to surround our position. I count at least 15 fighters, possibly more. They've got us boxed in. Jake finished setting the last charge and initiated the timer sequence. They had 8 minutes before the building would turn into a massive fireball. The problem was getting out alive before that happened. Peterson, where's that air support? Jake demanded while gathering his equipment. 2 minutes out, Corporal. Cobras are inbound hot. 2 minutes felt like an eternity, but it was better than the 4 they'd been looking at moments earlier. Jake knew they needed to create their own opportunity for escape, rather than waiting for rescue. The building had a back exit that led to a narrow alley running behind the main courtyard. If they could reach that alley, they might be able to work their way around the enemy positions and link up with their air support when it arrived. Chen, Williams, we're going out the back, low and fast. Rodriguez, can you give us covering fire when we move? Roger that. I've got eyes on most of their positions. Give me 30 seconds to get ready. Jake double-checked the timer on his charges. 7 minutes and counting. The explosion would be massive, probably enough to take out half the block. They needed to be far away when it happened. The team moved toward the back of the building, weapons ready and senses heightened. Jake could hear Rodriguez engaging targets in the courtyard, her rifle firing in controlled bursts designed to keep the enemy's heads down. Go, go, go. Jake pushed open the rear door and sprinted into the alley, Chen and Williams right behind him. The narrow passage was empty, but Jake knew that wouldn't last long. Enemy fighters would be moving to cut off all escape routes. They ran down the alley in tactical formation, Jake leading with Chen and Williams covering their flanks. The sound of helicopter rotors was getting louder, but they were still not visible over the buildings. Halfway down the alley, a fighter appeared at the far end raising an AK-47. Jake dropped to one knee and fired twice, his shots finding their target before the insurgent could get off a round. The body dropped, but the gunfire would alert others to their position. Move, move, move. Jake urged his team forward. They had maybe 5 minutes before the charges detonated, and they were still too close to the blast zone. As they reached the end of the alley, the distinctive sound of Cobra gunships filled the air. The attack helicopters appeared over the rooftops like mechanical angels, their weapon systems already tracking targets on the ground. Charlie team, this is Viper Flight. We have eyes on multiple hostiles in your area, marking targets now. The pilot's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos on the ground. Jake keyed his radio while taking cover behind a low wall. Viper Flight, be advised we have charges set to detonate in approximately 4 minutes. Large secondary explosions expected. Our position is... He gave their exact coordinates and warned the pilots about the impending blast. Copy that, Charlie team. We'll clear a path for your extraction. Stay low and follow our gun runs. The Cobras opened fire with devastating effect. Their 20mm cannons and Hellfire missiles turned the insurgent positions into clouds of dust and debris. The enemy fighters who had been confidently surrounding the Marines moments earlier were now running for their lives. Jake saw their opportunity. Rodriguez, Peterson, fall back to our position. The birds are clearing us a path. His teammates acknowledged and began moving from their positions in the courtyard. Jake could see them darting between cover points while the helicopter gunships continued their attack runs overhead. The timer in Jake's head was counting down relentlessly. 3 minutes until detonation. They needed to get Rodriguez and Peterson clear of the courtyard, and then put significant distance between themselves and the building they had just rigged to explode. Come on. Come on, Jake muttered under his breath as he watched his teammates navigate the danger zone. Rodriguez was moving fast, using the confusion created by the airstrikes to mask her movement. Peterson was right behind her, carrying the heavy radio equipment that kept them connected to their support. A stray rocket-propelled grenade whooshed overhead, missing Jake's position by mere feet. The explosion behind him showered the area with concrete fragments and reminded him that despite air support, they were still in extreme danger. "Corporal," Shen shouted, pointing toward a rooftop where an insurgent with an RPG was taking aim at one of the Cobras. Jake swung his rifle around and fired rapidly, his bullets forcing the fighter to take cover just as he was about to launch his weapon. Rodriguez and Peterson reached their position just as Jake's mental countdown hit 2 minutes. The building packed with explosives was still too close for comfort, and they needed to keep moving. "Which way?" Williams asked, scanning the available routes while more explosions echoed around them. Jake checked his map quickly. There was a compound about 300 meters to the west that looked defensible and was outside the expected blast radius. It would have to do. "That direction," Jake pointed toward their objective. "Stay together, watch for secondary ambushes, and whatever you do, don't stop running until we reach cover." The team moved out as a unit, their training and experience evident in how they maintained formation, despite the chaos around them. The Cobra gunships continued to provide covering fire. But Jake knew the pilots couldn't stay on station indefinitely. As they ran across open ground toward their objective, Jake caught sight of movement in his peripheral vision. More insurgent fighters were arriving from different directions, apparently undeterred by the helicopter attacks. The situation was escalating beyond what their small team could handle. "Viper flight, we've got more hostiles inbound from multiple directions," Jake reported while running. "How much longer can you stay on station?" "Charlie team, we're getting low on fuel and ammunition. Maybe 10 more minutes before we have to cycle out. 10 minutes would have to be enough." Jake's charges would detonate in less than 2 minutes, hopefully eliminating the immediate threat. After that, they would need to find a way to survive until additional support arrived. The countdown in his head continued relentlessly as his team raced against time and physics, trying to put enough distance between themselves and what was about to become ground zero of a massive explosion. The ground beneath Jake's feet seemed to shake before the sound reached his ears. Then came the roar, a deep, earth-shattering explosion that felt like the world was being torn apart. The shockwave hit him like an invisible freight train, lifting him off his feet and hurling him forward through the air. Time slowed to a crawl as Jake flew through space, his body tumbling helplessly. He watched pieces of buildings, chunks of concrete, and twisted metal spinning around him like deadly confetti. The explosion had been much larger than he calculated. The insurgents must have stored additional explosive materials that his team hadn't discovered. He hit the ground hard, his body slamming into the dirt with bone-jarring force. Pain shot through his left arm and ribs as he rolled several times before coming to rest against a low stone wall. His ears were ringing so loudly that he couldn't hear anything else. The world had gone silent except for that persistent, high-pitched whine. Jake tried to push himself up, but his left arm wouldn't respond properly. Looking down, he saw that his uniform sleeve was torn and dark with blood. His arm was bent at an unnatural angle below the elbow, definitely broken. Shrapnel had torn through his gear and embedded itself in several places across his body. Through the haze of dust and smoke, Jake could see the massive crater where the IED factory had been. The explosion had leveled not just the target building, but 3 adjacent structures as well. Debris was still falling from the sky like rain, clattering on rooftops and bouncing off the ground around him. "Chen, Williams, Rodriguez," Jake tried to shout, but his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. The ringing in his ears made it impossible to know if he was speaking loudly enough for anyone to hear. He spotted movement about 50 meters away, a figure in marine combat gear struggling to stand. It looked like Peterson, still clutching his radio equipment despite being obviously injured. Jake tried to call out again, but the communications specialist couldn't hear him over his own hearing damage. Williams was closer, maybe 30 meters to Jake's right. He was moving, which was a good sign, but Jake could see blood covering the side of his face. The young Marine was trying to reach his rifle, which had been blown clear of his position by the blast. Jake forced himself to sit up, fighting through waves of dizziness and nausea. He needed to account for his entire team, assess their condition, and figure out how to get them to safety. The Cobra gunships were still circling overhead, but Jake couldn't hear their engines over the ringing in his ears. Something warm was running down his face. He touched his forehead and his fingers came away covered in blood. A piece of shrapnel had cut a deep gash above his left eyebrow. Blood was dripping into his eye, making it difficult to see clearly. The crater where the building had been was enormous, easily 40 feet across and 20 feet deep. Secondary explosions were still going off as ammunition and remaining explosive materials cooked off in the fires that burned throughout the debris field. The destruction was far beyond what Jake had anticipated when he set those charges. Chen was the hardest to spot initially. Jake finally located him behind an overturned cart, not moving. Fear gripped Jake's chest as he began crawling toward his teammate, dragging his injured arm and ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs with each movement. "Chen, can you hear me?" Jake reached the young Marine and immediately checked for vital signs. Chen was unconscious but breathing. A large piece of concrete had struck him in the head, leaving a serious laceration, but his pulse was strong and steady. Jake's combat medic training kicked in despite his own injuries. He applied pressure to Chen's head wound using a field dressing from his kit, then checked for other injuries. The kit had been lucky, mostly superficial wounds and the head injury. He would need medical evacuation, but he would probably survive. Rodriguez was nowhere to be seen initially, which sent panic through Jake's mind. She had been in the courtyard when the explosion happened, much closer to ground zero than the rest of the team. Jake forced himself to stand, using the overturned cart for support, and scanned the devastated landscape for any sign of his sergeant. He found her partially buried under rubble about 40 meters from the blast site. She had been thrown even farther than Jake, slamming into the wall of a building with enough force to crack the mud bricks. Her legs were trapped under a fallen beam and she was unconscious. Jake stumbled toward her position, his broken arm hanging uselessly at his side. Each step sent lightning bolts of pain through his injured ribs, but he pushed forward anyway. Rodriguez had saved his life more times than he could count. He wasn't going to abandon her now. "Rodriguez! Maria!" Jake knelt beside her and checked her breathing. She was alive but unconscious. The beam across her legs was heavy, too heavy for Jake to move with only one functional arm. He needed help, but the rest of his team was scattered and injured. The sound of diesel engines reached Jake's damaged ears. More vehicles were approaching, and given the circumstances, they were probably not friendly. The explosion had definitely attracted attention from every insurgent fighter in the area. Jake tried his radio, but the device had been damaged in the blast. The antenna was bent and the screen was cracked. He couldn't reach the Cobra pilots or call for medical evacuation. They were on their own until someone came looking for them. Peterson was slowly making his way toward Jake's position, limping heavily on his left leg. His radio equipment was still functional. Jake could see the green lights indicating active channels, but Peterson was obviously disoriented and moving slowly. "Peterson, over here!" Jake waved his good arm, trying to get the communications specialist's attention. They needed to establish contact with their air support and coordinate immediate medical evacuation for the team. Williams had managed to retrieve his weapon and was taking up a defensive position behind some rubble. Even injured and probably concussed, his military training was keeping him focused on security. Jake felt a surge of pride in his Marines, even in their current desperate situation. The approaching vehicles were getting closer. Jake could now make out at least 2 trucks, possibly 3, moving rapidly toward their position. The insurgents would be looking for survivors to capture or kill, and Jake's team was in no condition to fight effectively. Jake made the difficult decision to leave Rodriguez temporarily and try to reach Peterson's radio. They needed air support immediately, both for medical evacuation and to deal with the approaching enemy forces. Every second counted now. Crawling across the debris-strewn ground, Jake ignored the pain shooting through his body with each movement. Pieces of hot metal and concrete cut through his uniform and into his skin. but he kept moving forward. His team's survival depended on getting help quickly. "Peterson, your radio," Jake called out when he got within 10 meters of the communications specialist. Peterson looked up, his eyes unfocused and a large bruise covering the left side of his face. "Radio?" "Yes. Radio works." Peterson's speech was slurred, indicating a probable concussion, but he still had enough awareness to understand what Jake needed. Jake reached Peterson just as the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the approaching vehicles. Williams was engaging targets with his rifle, buying them precious time to call for help. The young Marine was fighting despite his injuries, showing the courage and determination that made Jake proud to lead these men. "Get me the Cobras," Jake gasped, taking the radio handset with his good hand. "We need immediate casualty evacuation and close air support. We've got multiple injured and enemy forces closing on our position." Peterson fumbled with the radio controls, his injured hands shaking as he tried to establish contact with their air support. The green lights on the communication device flickered, and Jake prayed the equipment would hold together long enough to save his team. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors was barely audible over the continuing secondary explosions and Williams' rifle fire. Help was still out there, but Jake wondered if it would arrive in time to prevent a catastrophe. The radio crackled to life just as another burst of enemy gunfire forced Jake to duck behind a pile of concrete rubble. Peterson's hands were shaking badly, but he managed to tune into the correct frequency for their air support. "Viper flight, this is Charlie Team." Jake spoke into the handset, his voice hoarse and desperate. "We have multiple casualties and enemy forces advancing on our position. Request immediate close air support and medical evacuation." Static filled the radio for several agonizing seconds before the Cobra pilot's voice came through clearly. "Charlie Team, this is Viper 1-2. We see smoke and fires from your last known position. What is your current status and location?" Jake quickly provided their coordinates while Williams continued to engage enemy fighters who were advancing through the rubble field created by the massive explosion. The young Marine was making every shot count, but Jake could see that he was running low on ammunition. "Viper 1-2, we have 4 casualties, 2 critical. Enemy force strength unknown, but at least 1 squad with vehicles. We need immediate airstrike on approaching hostiles and urgent medical evacuation." "Roger that, Charlie Team, we're coming in hot. Mark your position with smoke if you have it." Jake checked his gear and found that his smoke grenades had been damaged in the blast. The canisters were dented, and one was leaking its colored contents onto his equipment vest. He couldn't risk using them, they might not work properly or could even explode. "Negative on smoke, Viper 1-2. We're in the large debris field approximately 100 meters west of the crater. Friendlies are marked by my position near the damaged radio operator." The Cobras appeared over the rooftops like mechanical hawks, their weapon systems already tracking the enemy vehicles that had been advancing on Jake's position. The lead helicopter opened fire with its 20mm cannon, the distinctive sound of the weapon cutting through the air like a chainsaw. Explosions erupted around the insurgent positions as the helicopter's rockets found their targets. One of the technical vehicles disappeared in a ball of flame and smoke, its ammunition exploding in secondary blasts that shook the ground beneath Jake's prone body. "Good hits, Viper 1-2. Keep them off us while we try to move our casualties," Jake called into the radio while crawling back toward Rodriguez's position. She was still unconscious under the heavy beam, and Jake knew he couldn't move her alone. Peterson was trying to follow Jake but was moving slowly due to his head injury. Williams maintained his defensive position but was clearly struggling with his own wounds. Chen remained unconscious but stable near the overturned cart. The sound of more vehicles approaching from a different direction made Jake's blood run cold. The insurgents were bringing in reinforcements, probably expecting to find an easy target in the aftermath of the explosion. Instead, they were walking into a hornet's nest of American firepower. "Viper flight, be advised we have additional hostiles approaching from the north. Multiple vehicles, unknown strength." Jake provided updates while trying to figure out how to move Rodriguez. "Copy that, Charlie Team. Viper 1-3 is engaging northern targets now. We'll keep them back, but we're running low on fuel and ammunition. Medical evacuation is inbound. Estimated arrival 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like hours given their current situation. Jake reached Rodriguez and checked her condition again. She was breathing but hadn't regained consciousness. The beam across her legs was definitely too heavy for him to move with his broken arm, but he had to try something. "Peterson, I need your help over here." Jake called to the communications specialist who was slowly making his way across the debris field. Peterson arrived just as another explosion rocked their position. The Cobras were systematically destroying enemy vehicles and fighting positions, but Jake could see muzzle flashes from multiple locations. The insurgents were taking cover in buildings around the blast site and continuing to engage the helicopters. "Help me lift this beam," Jake instructed Peterson, positioning himself at one end of the heavy wooden timber. Even with Peterson's help, Jake wasn't sure they could move it enough to free Rodriguez's trapped legs. Peterson grabbed the other end of the beam, his face pale and sweating from his head injury. "On 3, Jake counted down, gritting his teeth against the pain he knew was coming from his broken arm. They lifted together, Jake using his good arm and his back to provide leverage while Peterson strained against his end. The beam shifted slightly, but not enough to free Rodriguez. Jake's broken arm screamed in protest as he tried to help with the lifting motion. "Again, we need to get it higher," Jake gasped, repositioning himself for better leverage. Blood from his forehead wound was dripping steadily now, making it difficult to see clearly. This time they managed to raise the beam about 6 inches. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to pull Rodriguez free if they could maintain the lift. Jake looked around desperately for something to prop the beam up with, but the explosion had reduced everything nearby to rubble and splinters. "Williams, need you over here!" Jake shouted toward their defensive position. The young Marine looked back, torn between maintaining security and helping with the rescue. Another burst of gunfire from an enemy position made the decision for Williams. He quickly fired several suppressive rounds, then sprinted toward Jake's location while keeping low to avoid incoming bullets. "Help us hold this beam up while I pull Rodriguez out," Jake ordered as Williams arrived. The young Marine immediately grabbed the timber, allowing Jake to focus on freeing his sergeant. Jake crawled under the slightly raised beam and grabbed Rodriguez under her arms. Her legs were definitely injured. He could see swelling and unnatural positioning, but he had to risk moving her. Staying here meant certain death for all of them. "Ready, pull." Jake dragged Rodriguez backward while his 2 Marines maintained their grip on the heavy beam. Her legs came free just as Peterson's strength gave out, and the timber crashed back down to the ground. Rodriguez stirred slightly as Jake checked her pulse and breathing. Her legs were badly injured, possibly broken, but she was alive and her vital signs were stable. They would need to carry her to any extraction point. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the Cobra pilots. "Charlie team, we're seeing a large group of hostiles moving toward your position from the east. Looks like at least 20 fighters with heavy weapons. We're engaging now, but you need to be ready to move." Jake looked toward the east and could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions. The insurgents were making a coordinated assault on their location, probably hoping to capture American prisoners or recover intelligence from the destroyed weapons facility. "Copy that, Viper Flight. We're preparing to move casualties now. Where's that medical evacuation?" "Dust-off is 3 minutes out, but the landing zone is getting hot. We'll try to clear it for them, but it's going to be tight." Jake made quick calculations in his head. They had 4 injured Marines, including 2 who couldn't walk. They were 3 minutes from possible rescue, but surrounded by enemy fighters who were closing in from multiple directions. The math didn't look good. "Peterson, is that radio still working? Can you reach our main base?" Jake asked while applying a pressure bandage to Rodriguez's leg wound. "I think so, Corporal. What do you need?" "Tell them we've found and destroyed a major IED manufacturing facility." "Grid coordinates." Jake rattled off their position again. "Tell them this was big. Maybe 50 completed devices plus manufacturing capability. Our intelligence was good." Peterson relayed the information while Jake continued working on Rodriguez. Even if they didn't make it out, their mission had been successful. The weapons facility was destroyed, and that would save American lives down the road. Williams had returned to his defensive position and was engaging targets with controlled, aimed fire. Jake could tell the young Marine was making his ammunition last, but they were facing overwhelming numbers. "Corporal," Williams called out. "I can see the medical helicopter approaching from the south, but there's a lot of ground fire going up at it." Jake looked up to see a Black Hawk helicopter with Red Cross markings approaching their position. Tracer rounds from insurgent weapons were streaking up toward the aircraft like deadly fireworks. The pilot was bringing the helicopter in despite the intense fire, showing the kind of courage that made Jake proud to serve alongside such people. "That's our ride," Jake announced to his team. "We need to get ready to move." Peterson, help me with Rodriguez. Williams, grab Chen and let's get to that landing zone. The four Marines began moving toward the clearing where the medical helicopter was attempting to land. Each step was agony for Jake, his broken arm and injured ribs sending waves of pain through his body. But they were so close to safety now that he couldn't give up. The Cobra gunships were making attack runs all around the landing zone, trying to suppress the enemy fire long enough for the medical evacuation to succeed. Explosions and gunfire filled the air as the helicopter pilots risked their lives to save Jake's team. 50 meters to the landing zone, Jake gasped, half carrying Rodriguez while Peterson supported her other side. Williams was struggling with Chen's unconscious form but making steady progress. That's when Jake saw the insurgent fighter rise up from behind a pile of rubble, an RPG launcher on his shoulder, aimed directly at the incoming medical helicopter. The Marine Corporal knew that if that rocket found its target, everyone aboard the aircraft would die and his team would be stranded in hostile territory. Without thinking, Jake dropped Rodriguez and drew his sidearm with his good hand. The distance was long for a pistol shot, especially with his injuries, but he had to try. The insurgent was concentrating on the helicopter and hadn't noticed Jake's movement. Jake took careful aim, knowing he would only get one chance. His hand was shaking from blood loss and pain, but his training took over. He squeezed the trigger just as the insurgent was about to fire his rocket. The pistol shot echoed across the battlefield, and Jake watched the insurgent fighter crumple backward, his RPG launcher falling harmlessly to the ground. The rocket that could have destroyed the medical helicopter and killed everyone aboard never fired. Jake's aim had been true despite his injuries and the impossible circumstances, but the effort of that final shot had cost him dearly. Jake felt his strength leaving his body like air from a punctured balloon. The adrenaline that had been keeping him moving despite his severe injuries was finally running out. He collapsed to his knees, his vision starting to blur around the edges. "Corporal!" Peterson dropped his end of Rodriguez and rushed to Jake's side. Blood was flowing more freely now from multiple wounds, and Jake's face had turned pale gray. The combination of blood loss, shock, and exhaustion was overwhelming his body's ability to function. The Black Hawk helicopter touched down in the clearing with rotor wash throwing dust and debris in all directions. Jake could see the crew chief and a flight medic jumping out with stretchers and medical equipment. Help had finally arrived, but Jake wasn't sure he would be conscious to see it. "Get Rodriguez and Chen on that bird first," Jake managed to whisper to Peterson. His voice was barely audible over the helicopter noise and continuing gunfire. "They're hurt worse than me." Peterson shook his head firmly. "Sir, you're bleeding out. You need medical attention, right?" "No." The communication specialist was trying to apply pressure to Jake's worst wounds while signaling frantically for the medical team. Williams had reached the helicopter with Chen's unconscious form and was loading him onto a stretcher with help from the flight medic. The young Marine then turned back toward Jake's position, preparing to help carry Rodriguez to the aircraft. The flight medic reached Jake first, immediately assessing his condition with practiced efficiency. Multiple penetrating wounds, probable broken arm, significant blood loss, the medic called out to his crew while starting an IV line in Jake's good arm. "My sergeant," Jake tried to point toward Rodriguez with his broken arm, sending fresh waves of agony through his body. "She's trapped under debris. Legs are hurt bad. We've got her, Marine. You just worry about staying conscious," the medic replied while signaling for additional help. Two more crew members were already moving toward Rodriguez with a backboard and medical equipment. Jake felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher, his body weight supported by hands that seemed infinitely gentle, despite the chaos around them. The world was spinning now, and he could hear voices that seemed to come from very far away. "Stay with me, Corporal. What's your name?" The flight medic was talking to him, trying to keep him alert during the short flight to the field hospital. "Morrison, Jake Morrison," he managed to answer, though speaking required tremendous effort. "My team, are they all aboard and stable?" "You did good, Marine. You all did real good." The medic continued working on Jake's wounds while the helicopter lifted off from the landing zone. Through the aircraft's windows, Jake could see the Cobra gunships making final attack runs on the insurgent positions below. Explosions dotted the landscape as the pilots eliminated the remaining threats in the area. The immediate danger was over, but Jake knew the cost had been high. The flight to the field hospital took only 12 minutes, but it felt like hours to Jake as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke up, the flight medic was there, checking his vital signs and adjusting his IV fluids. Professional voices discussed blood pressure, pulse rates, and medical procedures that Jake's clouded mind couldn't quite follow. Landing in 30 seconds. Trauma team is standing by, someone announced over the helicopter's internal communication system. Jake felt the aircraft touch down and immediately heard running footsteps and shouting voices. The stretcher was pulled from the helicopter and rushed toward a large tent with bright lights spilling out of its entrance. Medical personnel in surgical scrubs were everywhere, working with practiced urgency. Multiple trauma, significant blood loss, possible internal injuries. He heard the flight medic briefing the trauma team as they moved his stretcher into the medical facility. The bright lights inside the tent made Jake squint, and he could see masked faces looking down at him with concerned expressions. Hands were cutting away his uniform and equipment, exposing his wounds for better assessment. "Can you tell me your name and unit?" A woman's voice, calm and professional, came from somewhere above him. "Corporal Jake Morrison, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines," Jake replied automatically, his military training overriding his physical condition. "Good. Stay with us, Corporal Morrison. We're going to take excellent care of you." The voice belonged to a surgeon who was already examining his injuries with expert hands. Jake tried to ask about his team but found that speaking was becoming increasingly difficult. The medical team was working quickly around him, starting additional IV lines, taking x-rays, and preparing him for surgery. "Rodriguez, is she?" Jake managed to whisper. "Your sergeant is in surgery right now. Both legs fractured but stable condition. The young private is being treated for head trauma, but he's conscious and talking. Your communications specialist has a concussion, but he's going to be fine." The surgeon provided updates while continuing her examination. Relief flooded through Jake's body. His team was alive. They had all made it out of that hell and would recover from their injuries. The mission had been successful, and more importantly, they had survived. "You saved their lives, Corporal," the surgeon continued. "The reports we're getting say you held that position and got your people out despite severe injuries. That takes real courage." Jake wanted to tell her that it wasn't courage. It was just doing his job, taking care of his Marines the way they would take care of him. But the anesthesia was taking effect now, and the bright lights were fading to comfortable darkness. His last conscious thought was of his team. Chen, the young Marine who had performed like a veteran under fire. Williams, who had fought despite his injuries to protect them all. Peterson, who had kept their communications working when everything else was falling apart. And Rodriguez, his sergeant and friend, who had trusted him to bring them all home safely. 3 days later, Jake woke up in a hospital bed with his left arm in a cast and bandages covering most of his upper body. The pain was manageable thanks to medication, and he could think clearly for the first time since the explosion. A Navy nurse informed him that his injuries included a broken ulna, 3 cracked ribs, multiple shrapnel wounds, and a concussion. He would need several weeks of recovery, but he would make a full recovery and return to duty. More importantly, she told him that his entire team was alive and recovering. Rodriguez had undergone surgery to repair fractures in both legs but would walk again. Chen had suffered a serious concussion but was alert and responsive. Williams and Peterson had been treated and released to light duty. The nurse also mentioned that their commanding officer wanted to speak with him when he felt up to it. The intelligence gathered from the destroyed weapons facility had been significant, and there would probably be commendations for the entire team. But what meant the most to Jake was a message that Rodriguez had asked the nurse to deliver. "Tell the corporal that his Marines are proud to serve under him, and will be ready to go back out there whenever he is." Jake Morrison closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that when he healed, he would be going back to the job he loved with the people he trusted most. The blast had broken his body temporarily, but it had proven something important about the unbreakable bonds between Marines who served together in combat. Outside his hospital window, he could hear the sound of helicopters taking off for another mission, carrying other Marines into harm's way. Soon, when his body healed, Jake would be joining them again. Until then, he would recover, learn from what had happened, and prepare to lead his team through whatever challenges lay ahead. The war would continue, but Jake Morrison and his Marines had proven that no matter how difficult the circumstances, they would never leave each other behind.